Hey guys and girls, thanks for joining me. Today we've got a bit more Nikon talk to do. We've got two cameras here. As you can see here, I have now the Z6 Mark II and the Z7 Mark II. And which is the new edition? Well, it's actually the Z6 Mark II. Now, formerly, of course, I've owned the first generation of the two cameras. I had the Z6, initially the first version 1, and I had the Z7 version 1. And over time, I've upgraded to both now the Series 2 Z7 and the Series 2 Z6. Now, one might ask, well, what are the relevances of this and the advantages? And let's look at some of the pros and cons of these different upgraded cameras and just how much better or worse they really are. So there's no downsides to the upgrade. They are a magnificent new camera body. It's the latest and current version. Now, we're all aware that probably at the end of this year of 2023, the version 3 may be released. There's no guarantees or promises just yet, but we know the Z8 is just around the corner. There's been releases and insinuations that's coming very soon as a pre-release. And then, of course, pre-production models, and soon it'll be available. So we know that that's on the cards very soon. But that's not here yet, so that's really not in the equation. The Z9 is a fantastic camera. Everybody raves about how great it is, and I believe it is awesome, but it's just too heavy and big for my uses, and it's overkill for most of what I do. So if I need 45 megapixels, I have a Z7II for that, and that's everything I need. I don't really need all the superior tracking focuses. I don't need the 8K video, and a lot of the features I just will never use. I just don't do a lot of professional cinematic work. I do some video, and a lot of it's hobbyist, and very little of it is professional studio work, so I just really don't need those features at the moment. So to spend what would be $8,000 or $9,000 Australian on a camera I wouldn't use most of the features of, would be pointless. So I'm very happy with what I have, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Not what could be or what would be optimum, but what's the most practical. And for most of us, the Z6 and Z7II series is very affordable and also quite excellent. Now, how does this work for us financially? Well, if you buy them new, the Z7II, for example, as the base body I'm talking about here, it can be around $4,000 to $5,000 Australian, about $3.5 US. The Z6II, for example, if you buy just a body of that, again, it's around $3,400 or something like that Australian. And if you're going to be buying it second hand, you'll get it quite cheap. So what I found as I did is I upgraded and got the Z6II as a backup camera. It's not only a backup photo camera, but it's also very excellent as a video camera, and I'll be using that a lot for my video in the future. Right now I'm shooting on the ZFC, so that's the third camera in the equation. So I have the ZFC for a lot of video. It's very excellent when you're shooting around 24, 25 and 30 frames a second. As a video camera, it is actually really excellent. A lot of my videos are done now on that, and I find it very reliable and quite excellent. I mean, let's face it, with 4K video, you only need a maximum of 12 megapixels. This one's already got 21, so it's more than adequate for anything I do that's video in those frame rates. If I want to go higher to 60 frames per second, that's why I have these two guys, so I can use them as well. But for a lot of my video, it's simply done on the ZFC because it's just so damn good with the autofocus and so practical. So flippy screen, good tracking focus, and an adequate image, it's everything I need at the moment. So right now I'm going to talk to you about these two cameras and their variations. I'm going to say what's different between them. There'll be both photo samples between the two. There'll be video samples. And when I do photos and video samples, I'm using the same settings and the same lens on when I do these samples. So I'm not trying to trick you by saying, oh, I've got a really good lens on this one and a poor lens on that one. It's actually the same lens on both cameras. I just swap it from one to another when I do the samples. So the settings, the lenses, all the post-editing. The post-editing is almost non-existent. Really all I'm doing is changing maybe the color balance to match them up so that they suit. But I'm not hyping up the images in any way. It's pretty much straight out of camera. And that includes the photos as well as the video. So initially what we're going to discuss is the actual features of them and why you have a Z6 in preference to a Z7, or vice versa, where the Z7 outshines the Z6. So the first things we're going to talk about is the camera bodies themselves are actually almost identical. I mean, really, let's have a look at them. I've got here the grip on this one, so it looks a little bigger and different. There's a reason for that, and I'll explain it in a minute. But the actual original camera bodies are identical, and the button layouts are the same as the original version ones. So there's really no difference structurally with them as far as their physical appearance or look or where the feature buttons and so on go. The big difference in the two cameras is the sensor. The Z7 has 45 megapixels and the Z6 has 24. And you might say, well, twice the megapixels, that's the one to go for. Well, it's the one to go for if you need high resolution photos. So if you're doing product photography, for example, if you're doing bird photography where you might have a little swallow or something in the scene and you've got to expand that photo, blow it up as it were to fill the frame, then yeah, the extra pixels are really awesome and that's very, very useful. And that's exactly why I have it. I have it for those high resolution photos. However, when you compare the images between the 24 megapixel and the 45 on your screen on your home, and I've got a massive screen there. I've got a 40-inch 4K 60 frames a second monitor. It's massive. And I do that for my video editing. I can see everything beautifully. So it's a big monitor. We're talking about a monitor this size when I'm looking at my gear. And I'm that far away from it. I mean, literally I get in really close. Because of the 4K resolution, I can see everything. And when I pixel peep on these two images, there is actually very little between them. So you might say it's got twice the megapixels. Yes, but where's the practical application of that? It's really only when you're cropping in and you're blowing up the image. For example, as I mentioned, with like a little bird in a photo, and you've got to bring that up. So, for example, and I'll just illustrate this, a 4K monitor is actually only 12 megapixels. This is 24 megapixels. This one here is 45 megapixels. Your 4K computer monitor, 12 megapixels. So you really can't even benefit from the Z6 fully, unless you blow up the image 100%. And then you've got to blow up the image 200% to benefit from the Z7, which is something you're never going to do to watch photos or videos, are you? So the whole megapixel scene is really all a bit farcical. It's really a megapixel race that's very little benefit to you in the long run, for the most part. So even when I expand the image and I fill that screen, that 40-inch monitor with the Z6 images, I find that the resolution is astoundingly good and sharp. In fact, I couldn't want for a better image. And if I do zoom into 100%, it still looks incredibly sharp. The Z7 is ludicrous. You can blow it up 200% and it still looks sharp. But who does that? Who has photos that you blow up the size of a living room door? Not very often. Most of the time, most of your pictures and photos are posted on Facebook or Instagram, and they're tiny little things. Maybe they're on something about the size of a mobile phone, or if you're very, very lucky, they might be on something about the volume of a tablet, and that's very small and not always even 4K resolution. So what I'm really pointing out here is let's not get obsessed with the megapixel numbers as if numbers mean everything. They really, when it comes down to the equation of the image quality, they mean very little. And I'm going to show you some samples where I show you the actual photo side by side from the Z6 and Z7, exact same image in the same settings and same lighting conditions, and then I'll blow it up 100%. I'm not zooming, I'm actually blowing up or expanding that image. I'm cropping in, and I'll show you what it looks like cropped in, and you'll be astounded how good they still are comparatively. So what I'm finding, and just to give you I want to give you a rough idea, a ballpark, so it's not just all too much science and details and technicality, because you really can't even appreciate it on the screen when I show you. YouTube algorithms, they tend to reduce the quality of the images anyway. So even if I put them on and you look at them up on a decent monitor, it's still a compressed file. So you're really not benefiting. You have to actually see it with your own eyes on your own monitor. But please take my word for it, because let me say this. When I mention something about these cameras, or I talk about photography in general at all, please understand that my YouTube channel is not even monetized. I don't have enough viewers to make that worthwhile anyway. My expressions and my opinions are really from the heart and personal experience, and I am telling you the truth, how I found it. Now, I can be wrong. Sometimes I make mistakes, and I'm happy to be corrected. But everything I tell you, and I'm convinced that something is so, it is 100% true and honest opinion without any bias of any financial backing or any product endorsements or any such things. There's none of that. It is completely honest opinion and experience. So what I'm going to say to you is a comparative percentages so you understand how things are working with these two cameras and the resolutions that they provide for photos. So with the photo resolution, there is what we would call a diminishing case of returns. So what happens is when you have 12 megapixels, you have an image that you can be expanded up to a certain size and is of a certain quality of detail. Then when you get up to something like 24 megapixels, and let's say 20 to 24 megapixels is pretty much an industrial standard. If you think about the latest DSLR that came out, the D6 and the D5, they were around 20 megapixels. So that was an astounding resolution, but they still gave beautiful images, and they did that because of pixel pitch and sensor size. So proportionally, when you have a big pixel and you have it on a pitch that is relatively flat, it is taking in a whole lot of image and light and detail. And so even though there aren't a lot of dots, the dots are of extremely high quality and bright and clean. And so that's an important factor. So having a full frame sensor is very important, more important than the megapixel count. It's just having a full frame sensor at all. And then having a high quality product from a good manufacturer, as Nikon are, you can be sure your images are going to be astounding regardless of the megapixels. So I was talking about diminishing returns. 24 megapixels, this here you got 45, you've got twice as many on the Z7, the image is not twice as good. Just let me clear that up, because a lot of people are thinking it's all about the numbers game. Megapixel war, if you can have 40 or you can have 50 or you can have 60 or 70 or 80 megapixels, that's better. More is better. More is not better. More is only better for certain circumstances under certain conditions. If you have extremely good lighting, you're in a studio, and you can control the lighting 100%, or you're out in broad daylight and there's good light shining directly on your subject, high megapixel count's great. But that's not always where you're photoing, is it? That's not always the circumstances convenient. Generally, for the most part, you've got compromised lighting, and therefore more megapixels actually diminish your image. Because now what you've got is lots of little spots of light, little pixels, and they're all on a pitch in order to fit them in and stack them, and then they end up being less quality. The image quality resolution. So even though there's more dots, the quality of each dot is poorer. And this is where what you find is, even though there is an astounding difference in the numbers, 24 to 45, the image quality is actually about in the middle and the same. The end result is, out of camera, that you're actually getting around like a 36 megapixel image, like my old D810 was, the old DSLR I had. I used to love that camera, and at 36 megapixels, that was an amazing image. I really loved what that produced. But that's sort of what you're getting, because this has got so many megapixels, the image quality tends to reduce per pixel. This one here's got a smaller amount, you get a better, lighter quality image per pixel, and it ends up not that much difference. So yes, you zoom in, you zoom in, you blow it up, you can see some difference if you're pixel peeping. But the general image as seen from your computer monitor is almost no different. Almost impossible to tell, which those image samples will convince you of. So really it's horses for courses, but don't think you're compromising or you're getting a worse result simply because you've got a slightly cheaper model with less pixels. 9 times out of 10, it's this sort of a camera that's most relevant and useful for you in most circumstances. So that's really all I've got to summarise about the pixel details, and not to get really overwhelmed with numbers, because really this is not a numbers game, it's a quality of sensor game, and everything has its purpose and its usefulness. Now, for example, both of these two do video as well. So let's talk a little bit about video. I'll give you a lot of samples very shortly on video, where I'll go through various ISOs of both cameras. They're both using the same settings, the same lens, which is actually this 50 f1.2. I'll be shooting at 2.8 because that's generally what people do video at, and that'll give you a good across idea of just how good the images are between the two cameras. And just to summarize the video elements of it, I'll make it a quick summary right now. What you find is that the Z6 is much better for low light videography. However, if you're using studio lighting and you have LED panels, there's not a lot of difference in the two really. But where it really shows up is with the ISO. So if you have to crank up the ISO, the Z6 is vastly superior. I'm going to put it at least 20 to 25% better than the Z7 in image quality. Whether that be at 24, 25 frames a second, or you're doing 50 or 60 frames per second, it's the same result. It is dramatically better, the Z6, for video quality. And that's both in the actual detail of the image, how it appears on the screen, and the low light ability also with high ISOs. Now, when I talk high ISOs, I give those sample video I'll show you shortly, up to, I think it was 6,400 ISO. Anything beyond that to me is stupid. It's just not even worth considering. If you're having to crank up ISOs over 10,000, well, then you really should just be using more light. I mean, LED light panels these days are very inexpensive and they're very lightweight and portable. There is no excuse not to have a modest, at least, light with you that will help you reduce your ISOs dramatically. The only time you need outrageously high ISO is if you have no lighting at all. You should never go out videoing, and especially at night or in low light conditions, and have no light whatsoever. So really anything, as I say, above 6400 is really not necessary unless you're not doing things correctly. But definitely the Z6 is the better one if you're looking at video, and because the photo quality is so high with those bigger pixels, you'll find that you are not compromising with photos either. So the Z6 was something I purchased recently. Now I had the Z6I some time ago. I got rid of it when the Z7 and Z6II came out because I like the extra features, the twin cards, for example, great idea for backup and overflow. So a lot of people haven't thought about that, but it's not just that you get a photo backup of RAW in one and JPEGs maybe in the other, but the very important thing is that when you're doing video, you can have an overflow system. So you fill up the CF Express card, you can then go over to your high quality, say V90 SD card, and then you can continue videoing all day to your heart's content. And you don't have to worry about stopping and swapping cards, and you just continue on videoing because you have two cards to fill up. So the two card slots are amazing for every conceivable reason, backup and continuous video or photos all day. It's nice not to have to muck around with cards. The other advantage with this unit here is why I've left the grip on. This grip, I think it's like an MB11 or something like that it's called. Fantastic grip. This is actually really high quality, comfortable, makes the portrait photography superbly comfortable to do and use. I love using this, and if I'm doing portraits all day, definitely I'm having that grip on because it feels so good. You get double the battery life, of course, because it's got two batteries inside it. Let me just show you that. You may or may not have seen this thing open up, but it has a little switch on the side here. You can see the batteries there. If you pull them out, you can pull one battery out and replace it. If you're running low, it'll switch over to the one still in the cavity and still keep running. And you can just swap this one out indefinitely and continually swapping it and have endless battery supply. So that's a pretty cool option, isn't it? The other thing you can do is you can bring the whole cartridge out. And if I just bring that cartridge out, you can see here how it all operates. So you have here two batteries. Obviously the latest C version of the batteries in there, and what they'll do is they'll basically run most of your day. Photos and a lot of video, and the beauty of this is, as I say, you can just simply swap one battery. It'll continue using that one. You put your fresh battery in and you've just got batteries all day without fumbling around taking your camera off a mount or something. So that's very convenient. So it's a great system. I like this battery arrangement, the battery pack. I think it's fantastic. Here, of course, you have USB charging. You can put the USB in, charge it directly into this unit. You don't have to bring a charger around, just a USB cable. So that's very, very handy and useful and convenient. So I'm loving it. It's better than a battery box that they had on the Series 1 because here you've got all your buttons and features. You've got your scrolling wheel, you've got your thumb, you can press the button, take photos, change your settings and ISO, and that's just fantastic to have all that versatility. So the Z7, I leave that for predominantly for my photo work. That's 90% of my photos will be taken with the Z7. I'll leave the battery pack on it a lot of the time. This one here, the Z6, I'm mostly using for video. So whether that be on a tripod or it's on my Ronin, which I like the stabilizing video, I can roam around and follow someone along, and I'll use the Z6 on that because very accurately the video quality of this unit is vastly superior to the Z7, I find. So this is actually a great backup video camera. This is my primary video camera, and then I've also got the ZFC if I need it. And that's how I'm structuring these cameras. Would I like to have the Z8 and all those new features, maybe the 7 processor and all the other Z9 hand-me-down features? Yeah, that'd be cool, and maybe I will get that in the future. But right now, these are servicing me very well, so I don't feel like I'm compromising at all. People often talk about autofocus issues, and they say, oh yeah, the autofocus is not as good as it could be. Well, what my experience is I'm often finding you're just choosing the wrong setting. There's not so much a camera fault as it is a user operator fault. You see, the eye detect is actually really good in these cameras. They're very, very well featured, and they function very well. But it's very important to choose the right setting. So if you've got a well-lit subject that's stationary, like I am right now, eye detect is fantastic. If you've got a subject that's often turning its back or stepping out of frame, then it's very useful to use more of a subject tracking mode. That way you're not relying on the eye, because if someone's turning around and you lose eye, then the video's got nothing to grab onto. It can hunt to the back. Now that's fine, because it's supposed to be eye detect. If there's no eye, you can't blame it. So then use subject tracking. Maybe put the box of subject tracking, rather than on the eye or face, put the box on the chest. And that way it's following the chest of the subject. And if they turn around, usually the shirt's the same colour as it is on the front as it is on the back, most times at least anyway, or similar. And that way you can find that colour, that theme and that look and follow the chest of the subject, which is usually pretty much in par with the face anyway. So that actually works quite conveniently and well. So remember this, subject tracking box and continuous focus on the chest. And if you've got someone sitting facing the camera and good lighting, use the eye detect, and the eye detect will work fantastic, and it'll never lose the subject, providing the camera can actually see an eye. It will find that eye and it will stick on it like glue. So I'm very happy with these units, but there are different horses for different courses, and you buy a different camera for a different use. I have the luxury of having several cameras to choose from, but if I had to choose just one only for everything, it would actually probably be the Z6. Because it's probably the most versatile all-rounder, and it's also practically a lot cheaper, which is very handy. So what sort of numbers are we talking about here? Well, here's a tip. The first tip we're going to get you when you're not buying this year's model, you're actually buying last year's model, buy it second-hand. Don't go out and buy it brand new at the retail shop. You're paying $1,000 extra for no purpose. Go get them. Look, I tell you, I buy a lot of stuff from Japan. I think I've mentioned this before. There are a lot of Japanese retailers, and they sell second-hand goods. So things have been brought in as a trade-in, trade-up. Maybe someone's decided to buy a Z9. They've brought their Z7 in, Z7 Mark II, and they want to trade it in. And then what you can do is you have the option then of buying a Z7II or a Z6II, and you'll get it $1,000 less than retail. And the thing's damn well near brand new anyway. I mean, these people, they really love to look after their stuff and respect their property. And so when you get them, they are in mint and pristine condition. They've been used, yes, but they've been lovingly used and well looked after and cared for. They haven't been kicked around like an old football. So you can buy them with confidence overseas, get them imported in. It only takes a few weeks and you're saving yourself $1,000 or so. This one, for example, I bought for $2,000. $2,000 Australian, which is about $1,300 US. That is really cheap for a Z6II, and it was in absolutely near perfect mint condition. I don't even know if they'd used it, to be honest with you. It looked like it hadn't even been used much, because when I went through the setting menu, it was basically the standard settings from out the box from the factory, which means no one's fiddled with it very much. So in that case, I know I've got a pristine unit, and I got it for nearly half price. So I was very, very happy. So I'm encouraging you to do the same. Don't get tempted to just buy retail shop. Go online, get them secondhand, but buy them from a dealer that you know you can trust and rely on, has good ratings, and you won't be disappointed. You'll save yourself a small fortune. In fact, instead of buying one Z7, you could buy at least two Z6s for less money secondhand than you could buy one of these Z7s new. So I reckon that's an incredible bargain. Okay, so we're just filming here with the Nikon Z7 Mark II. I've got it on a tripod and it's set at f2.8. And even though it's a 50mm 1.2, I thought f2.8 is a very fair testing range to sort out the clarity of the image. It's not so wide that it's too bright and shallow. It's not too long in focus that it's giving an unrealistic image impression. So I thought that was a pretty fair starting point. So the f2.8 is what I've selected. We've got 50th of a second because it's shooting at 4K at 25 frames per second. And then we've also got the ISO at 100. Now the native ISO on the Z7II is actually 64, but because the other camera will be ISO 100, it's its base standard, it's only fair to set them both at the same settings. So again, I'm just reading off those statistics again. We've got ISO 100, it's on f2.8, it's at 50th of a second, because we're using 25 frames per second as the video rate in 4K. So I just thought I'd give you a sample test now of these bottles. They're quite clear, they're well lit. I have a large LED panel to the left, and then I have a small. So here we are, we're filming with the Nikon Z6 Mark II now, and all the settings are exactly the same. So we've got the ISO at 100, the f-stop is 2.8, and the speed is 50th of a second. We're shooting at 25 frames on the 4K setting, and it's on a tripod and exactly the same lens, which is the 50mm f1.2s lens. So everything is identically set. It should be an identical image. We'll just check out the video quality and see if at that setting you can notice anything between the Z7II and the Z6II. So now what we've got is the Z6 Mark II. All the settings are identical except for one, and that is the ISO. So I've turned the lighting in the room down dramatically, removed one light completely, have a very, very soft LED light panel shining onto the surfaces of the bottles, and a very, very soft backlighting. So all the lights are set at their very lowest settings, and the ISO now is 3200. So 3200 ISO, all the other settings are the same. That is, it's a 4K at 25, 50th of a second shutter. So now we're recording with the Z7 Mark II, and the only thing we've changed with all the lenses and settings is really the ISO. So we've gone from what was a native like 100 ISO, and we've boosted that right up now to 3200. So that's 3200 ISO at 25 frames a second, 4K video, 50th of a second shutter speed, and f2.8. We're using the 51.2, but we're setting it at f2.8 to give a fair and balanced view of what most people would video at. Now the room is quite darkly lit like a nightclub, and I'm using one LED panel at its very lowest setting. In fact, it's a very, very dull light, not much better than really acute candle power. So here we have now the Nikon Z6 Mark II, and that's using all the same settings as previously, f2.8, using the 50mm 1.2 lens. The big difference here, of course, is like we're matching now the Z7II, which we'll show you, and this is at 6400 ISO. So it's the ISO 6400 with the Z6 Mark II, and it's just illustrating how well it looks and how clean the image may be at that ISO setting. And as I've said before, and I'll say one more time, if you're shooting more than 6400, you're doing everything wrong. You really should be putting some LED lighting or some other form of continuous lighting on the subject, because shooting in the complete dark is a little bit ludicrous. So this is a very dully lit room. It'll be certainly even a little bit brighter perhaps in a nightclub or a movie theatre, but it's that sort of theme where it's actually quite dark, and you wouldn't be able to read a book or anything like that because the lighting is just too soft. So anyway, this is the image at 6400 for the Nikon Z6II, which is, I believe, the better of the ISO cameras for low light videography, and I just sort of give you a test sample there of how everything looks. So here we are, we're filming with the Nikon Z7II. We have all those same settings as the past. I won't reiterate them because it's all the same lens, same camera settings. And what we've got here is the big difference is the ISO. So we've jumped from the 3200 right up to 6400 now. So it's 6400 ISO. To me, this is like the maximum ISO you would ever use in a practical setting. If you're going higher than this, well, you're just doing everything wrong, aren't you? You really should be using lighting of some sort, some LED panel. So anyway, the bottom line is that this is what I think is a great example for what your extreme ISO really should be and will look like. So it's 6400 videoing in a very dull room. It's a very controlled environment, so I know that there's no sneaky bits of light coming in to interfere with that. I have that one small LED circular light panel behind shining onto the bottles. It's on its lowest setting of 10%. So if I go lower than that, it actually switches off. So you can imagine it's not much more than really a candle in light and illumination. And then there is an LED panel behind the bottles giving some form of backlighting, and that's just helping to balance out the lighting. But both of them are set at their very lowest settings, and they're very dull and filtered as well. So that's what 6400 looks like on the Nikon Z7II. So while we're still on about these cameras and their uses, I just would mention about the video facility here that's really relevant with the Z6II. And that is that when you do 60 frames per second or 50 frames per second, depending where you are and what format you use, it's crop sensor. It goes down and crops quite significantly. So the Z7 does crop too. When you go from, say, 20, 30 frames a second and then you punch it up to 50 or 60, there is a crop. The crop is just marginal. It's sort of equivalent, I would assume, to say from going from 24mm to 26mm. That sort of variation in cropping. It's only small, but it's there, it's present. But however, with the Z6, it's a massive crop. You go from full frame down to crop sensor. APS-C size. So you must keep that in mind when you're framing a subject. So what I recommend if you're doing a lot of videoing with the Z6, use a zoom if you can. So if you have something like a 14 to 24 2.8, that's great, because what you can do then, of course, is you can be using the 60 frames a second on say 14 to 18 mil. And then when you want to go into the 24 to 30 frames a second, you can go into 24, and it's the same framing. So you're not having to constantly change the framing. You may lose a little bit in your depth of field, but at least the image looks the same framing, and that's not confusing if you're going back and forth. So a zoom is convenient with the Z6. With the Z7, it makes no difference because the crop is so slight. It's only a 10 or 20% crop. You barely notice it, and something you can certainly adjust in post-processing and fix that. But it is something to keep in mind that if you're using a prime, it's like jumping from a 35 to a 50 millimeter. When you go from, say, 25 frames a second to 50 frames a second, it's a massive crop. The image quality is still astounding and good. There's no worries about that. So rather than the, I'm just trying to get the numbers right in my head, excuse me. So rather than going from 6K down to 4K, because this oversamples at 6K and drops it down to 4K, you get an excellent image because it's oversampled. It's a beautiful 30 frames up to video image. When you go to your 4K at 60, what happens then, it does pixel by pixel. So it's 12 megapixels, that crop sensor, because it's half the 24, and you get 12 megapixels and you get perfect 4K pixel by pixel without any line skipping or binning, which is what the Z7 does, and that's where it's a bit of an issue, because when it goes to the 60 frames per second, you're actually now getting quite an extensive line skipping and binning arrangement, and it's a little bit nasty. And the image quality, it's the same with the 4K at 24 and 30 and so on. So because it's got so many pixels, you have to get 45 megapixels in this camera down to 12 megapixels. You're losing a lot of imagery. So that's really not cool. You don't get the best results in 4K video with this one. You get much better results in the Z6, dramatically better results with video. So I just thought I'd bring that out. That's a reason why you're getting those different results. It's not just one's designed for video, one's designed for photos. It's just the compromises of the physical structure of the sensor and camera and its ability. Another, of course, good feature about getting the 2 version model, that is the Z7II or Z6II, is not only do you get the option of the battery group, which I was talking about, but you also get the option of the 60 frames a second because it has the 2 processors. So that's really the significant difference. The Series 1 had one X-Speed 6 processor. That means you get up to 30 frames a second. Now the Z7II and Z6II have 2 processors, 2 XP6s, then you can have double that frame rate. So you get now up to 60 frames a second. So that's why that feature is even available in these cameras. So that's a bonus to getting the Series 2. The other advantage, of course, was the memory cards I mentioned. You've got 2. You've got the CF Express and now the SD card backup or overflow. That is a big deal as well. You get the advantage of this grip, which I absolutely adore. And of course, you've got firmware upgradability. Now, talking about firmware upgradability, the camera's been out for about 2 years and we're still on version 1.5. That's very disappointing. So we're all looking forward to a big increase in the firmware, going for maybe a 2.0 or maybe even a 3.0 in the future. That will eventually happen, I'm sure, but it won't happen in any hurry necessarily. We've been waiting a long time and probably will still be waiting a good 6 months until something like that comes through. But when it does, I'm sure it'll be pretty outstanding. So why not? That's something that we can do with these you couldn't do with the Series 1. Series 1 is finished. I mean, if there are any upgrades or any firmware updates in the Series 1, it's going to be a very incremental one. It'll be an update to accommodate new lenses or new accessories. It really will not be a performance increase. These ones still can have a performance increase. So I'm looking forward to that, whether it be autofocus or it be some sort of features that are included. Who knows? We might be really fortunate, and in the future, the Z6II here may have an option with the firmware upgrade to not have to choose to crop. You might be able to choose full frame with the 60 frames per second. It might be a compromised image, as in like the Z7II. It's line skipped or binned or something, and might be a little bit lower in the quality, but at least you're not having to worry about the change of framing, going from full frame to APS-C. That would be a lovely option. If they provided that for us in a firmware 2.0 or 3.0 upgrade, that'd be amazing. Just for the option, not even that it's whether it's better or worse, just to have the choice of not having to reframe your image in the Z6II. So that's all I'm talking about with this.